Okay, and it looks like everyone has responded at this point. We had about 85% of you who did not. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited to share the information that we came up with at the summit. And for those 15% of you who did attend, we would encourage you that if you have something to share that we missed during the presentation, please go ahead and put that in the chat pod, and I will share that with our audience as well. And so at this point, I am going to turn over this first part of the presentation to Steve Albert to give you some background on the summit itself. Steve?
Thanks, thanks, Jamie, and good morning or good afternoon based on where you are. The National Working Summit on Transportation in Rural America was just that, a working summit. I think many people appreciated that they had the ability to not just listen to talking heads, but then also to have a dialogue on specific information. The summit was held in Denver, September 7th through the 9th for 3 days, and it focused on moving rural America and advancing safe transportation systems to enhance economic development and quality of life. We had 10 discussion topic areas that were predefined, and we hope to develop some element of a white paper from the information that you'll be receiving today. The goals of the summit were to define the future for rural transportation in America, to advance safe transportation systems, to bring together key leaders, next slide, to bring together key leaders and grassroots stakeholders that could work together to really change some of the statistics, especially as it relates to crashes and fatalities, but also other areas, and to articulate important and transportation issues that impact on a broader scale economic prosperity and quality of life in rural areas. The last goal of the summit was also to identify collaborative opportunities to develop and to advocate for initiatives that would advance safety in a sustainable rural network. WTI as the center did not do this alone. There were sponsors that also provided funding, such as the National Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation at Rutgers, as well as AASHTO. We could not have done the conference without Meetings Northwest, who really helped and to facilitate some of the program, as well as logistics for the conference. And we also worked with the National Association of County Engineers, NACE, as well as NATO, the National Association of Development Organizations, assist us with co-locating meetings. We did develop a steering committee. Next slide. I'm sorry, that's the right slide. We did not do this alone. We did it collaboratively with a number of different organizations, including FHWA Resource Center, NACE, NACO, the National Association of Development Organizations, NHTSA, also the Transportation Safety Advancement Group, TSAG, as well as ITS America. We had approximately 115 attendees. I think the largest percentage were folks who were from the Colorado area. We represented 27 states as well as Washington, D.C., and represented 16 different types of stakeholders. Those stakeholders are shown on the pie chart, with the largest percentages going to the county in yellow, the county transportation, and including NACE, and also NHTSA, FHWA, and ITS America, coupled with state DOTs at 9% and universities at 10%. So I think we had a pretty good swath of representation, including the other groups that may not necessarily be at other conferences like public health, as well as tribal and EMS. So I think we had a pretty good representation of America and specifically rural America who attended the event. Jamie?
Thank you. And so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the format of the webinar and what some of the outcomes were from the first day. So our first day of the the summit, we did a typical conference type format where we had podium presentations. And we started off with agency perspectives in rural transportation and what role does safety play. And we were really trying to get all of our attendees to think about what already exists out there, what some of these different perspectives were before we went into the second day and doing our roundtable discussion. And so we had a few different presenters. We had Mike Griffith from FHWA and David Sleet from the Center for Disease Control to give us the federal perspective. And then we had Shailene Bott, the Executive Director from Colorado DOT, and also a chair of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Transportation System Management and Operations to share the state perspective. And lastly on that panel, we had Cindy Bobbitt, who is the elected official for Grant County, Oklahoma, and she also serves as the Central Regional Representative for the NACO Executive Committee. We then had a two-part session after that one about the overview of rural challenges and setting the stage. And for this one, we had David Kack from WTI and Linda Dupriest from LDP Strategies talk to us about alternative transportation. We had Darren Roth from the American Trucking Association talk to us about freight. We had Blaine Leonard from Utah DOT talk to us about technology and connected vehicles. We had Steve Suter from the U.S. Fish Wildlife Service talk to us about federal land. We had Kirk Vinish from Lummi Nation talk to us about tribal challenges. And we had Dan Ditchkovsky from TSAG talk to us about first responders and EMS and law enforcement. And so I'm going to give you a few of the key themes that we heard from all of those different presentations. What we heard statistics-wise, we had Cindy Bobbitt provide quite a few statistics on the county side. Roughly 2/3 of the nation's 3,069 counties are considered rural, and those rural counties have a combined population of about 60 million. We also heard that counties have 45% of the nation's roads, and that includes 53% of road miles that run through rural America and 28% on the federal aid highway system. We also heard that the counties own about 39% of the national bridge inventory. So we have quite a bit of transportation infrastructure in the rural counties. We also heard about the disparities in motor vehicle crashes, and Dr. Sleet from the CDC said it best when he called it an epidemic on wheels. He said that about 9% of the population lives in rural America, but accounts for about 30% of the miles driven and 54% of all crashes. We also know that the death rate is 2.5 times higher in rural versus urban, and over about 18,000 people die on rural roads every year. We also know that it takes more than 2 times as long to get first responders to a crash site in rural areas. And so most of what I've just told you, I'm sure that you've all heard before, but I did want to give that as a reminder. We also heard about the economy and the infrastructure. We know, as the title of the summit said, that transportation moves rural America. Rural counties' economies are often built on a foundation provided by agricultural and natural resources. So we need to make sure that we have safe, viable road and multimodal systems to move not only people, but to move the goods and services. And we've also heard through the discussions that our transportation infrastructure is deteriorating. About 40% of the county roads are inadequate for current travel, and nearly half of the 450,000 rural bridges in America are structurally deficient. And while it seems like we should improve them, we heard that there are a lot of challenges in trying to do that, including local funding limitations and also the rising cost of transportation projects. We heard about challenges for each of the different groups. For many groups, the biggest challenge is just trying to be heard and be acknowledged as a priority and as a partner. We heard this mostly for groups such as public lands, tribal communities, law enforcement, and non-motorized. We heard, especially for tourism and public lands, that mostly they're thought of as an economic development partner and not necessarily as a transportation partner, because they are not bringing trips in due to freight or commuters, but they are bringing those trips in, and so they should be considered. We also heard that some communities are disproportionately impacted. One of the examples that was given is there are 5 to 7 more Native American people dying in traffic-related crashes than everyone else. We heard that many of our first responders in rural areas are volunteers, and they are lifesavers, and that this is a great thing that they're volunteers because they have personal relationships in their community. They know their community, and they're willing to be a volunteer and take this time. But we also need to make sure that we keep them properly trained and that we provide them with proper funding for the right equipment. And we also need to remember that when we're engaging them in planning, and we should be engaging them in planning, we need to remember that they also have full-time jobs. And so they may not be able to attend planning meetings between the normal hours of 8 and 5 when we would want them to. We heard that the supply of operators and truck drivers and staff is dwindling. And we also heard that many locals have very limited resources and that safety is not their only job. So I do want to make sure I tell you that we didn't just talk about the bad things. We also talked about a lot of the great things that are out there too. And we heard from Dr. Sleet at the CDC that the prevention strategies are working. He provided all of these great statistics that are up on this slide right here. So we heard how the laws and the enforcement and the engineering that we're all doing is helping and is providing prevention. But there's always more that we can do. And we heard hope. We heard the new mantra of Towards Zero Deaths and how that is being put into local road safety plans and how that's trying to be carried out across the nation. We heard about a resolution that was created by the Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, in 2015, reflecting the need to improve safety on county-owned roads and affirming that the DOT will work with NACO to improve road safety in America's communities. And it showed that there's an important role that our local elected officials can play in improving road safety. We heard a lot about the potential for collaboration between public health and transportation, and that that's not one of the areas that tend to collaborate currently, but that there is a great intersection in the area of safety. Both groups have safety information in their plans. Both have a lot of resources, and we should be coordinating and collaborating with them. And lastly, we heard that we should engage with our local officials in transportation planning and investment. And this can strengthen the partnerships and also empower our county officials to help engage in local partnerships. We also heard about progress. Jill Ryan, one of our elected officials who closed out our summit, gave this great quote that smart transportation planning plays a key role in ensuring local safety. And one way to do this is through undertaking a local road safety plan. It's a foundation for consensus and focus in your area and defines key emphasis areas and strategies for improving safety, and then should be coordinated with the state planning process. We heard a lot about innovation in the way of automated and connected vehicles and how there's a lot of different safety features that are being tried right now and how that may impact us in the future. And we also heard that there's a lot of resources available from many different sources. Many different partnerships, a lot of documentation, a lot of people to provide technical assistance. So you aren't alone in this journey. There are people out there that can help. And as I mentioned before, we will provide a list of a lot of these at the end of the presentation. We also heard great calls to action, and these are two that really resonated with me at the summit that I wanted to read out. Shailene Bott, the Executive Director of Colorado DOT, said we have two goals. One is to save people's lives, and the second one is to make people's lives better. And from a rural perspective, we still have a lot we can do. And then Cindy Bobbitt, our NACO Executive Committee representative, said effective collaboration and communication among community and safety stakeholders are necessary in order to achieve ambitious yet achievable safety goals. And these two statements really were a great way to end that first day and to go into the second day where we were going to have all our roundtable discussions and really share what the challenges were and come up with solutions. And so at this point, I would like to ask our three guest speakers, Hillary, Linda, and David, if they have any additional information that they would like to share based on their experiences attending firsthand from that first day.
Jamie, this is David, and I just share with everybody, I think, tying some of these things together, talking about smart transportation planning, can lead to better safety and the talk about making people's lives better. I think as we talk about transportation planning, to say how do we, build our communities is important because, are we building our communities in such that people have to get in their car and travel further to do what they want to do? Or are we building them such that, coming from the livability angle, that people can walk and bike to do a lot what they want to do? So just kind of tying those two thoughts together.
Thank you, David. And Hillary or Linda, did you have anything to share?
Hi, Jamie. This is Hillary. Go ahead, Linda.
No, go ahead, Hillary.
So I think one of the things from that opening day that caught my attention was when the CDOT executive, Shaylin Batt, talked about a new kind of way that CDOT is thinking about the way they do business. And I don't know if we covered this at all later, but one of the things he says is that CDOT is really, they save people's lives, but they also make people's lives better. And I think that was one of my takeaways definitely from that first afternoon, is of what that means to each of us that's in in our daily lives, in our daily work lives, in terms of thinking about that and what we do every day and how we can incorporate that into the things that we do.
Thank you, Hillary. And Linda, did you have something to share as well?
I think I'm going to hold my comments to a little later. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. For those of you who are listening on the phone, at this point we're going to take questions via the chat pod. I noticed that we did already receive one about where you can find the resolution. I have posted a link to where I found it so that you guys have that as well. If anyone has any other questions, please go ahead and put those in there. At this point, I'm also going to move this over to another poll question. And this poll question, to get your feedback, is which of the following is true? 54% of all crashes happen in a rural area. The death rate is 2.5 times higher in rural versus urban areas. Only 9% of the population lives in rural areas. There is a disparity in motor vehicle crashes between rural and urban areas. All of the above or none of the above. We'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and read that. Okay, and it looks like everyone has gone ahead and finished the poll at this point in time. And about 96% of you were correct. All of the above is true. Now we're going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about the second day. The second day of the summit, we did roundtable discussions. We had 10 of these going on, and they were broken up into silo sessions at the beginning where we tried to have each of the different types of organizations in their own silo, as we called it. So commerce and freight had their own, design, construction, operation, maintenance had one, rural emergency responders had a third. We had exploring common obstacles to increasing agency safety culture and best practices to overcome them in a fourth. And the fifth was on the effects and impacts of safety on tourism. And then at the second half of that day, we had what we called cross-group sessions. And these cross-group sessions were intended to mix up the attendees. So we were hoping that we would have local elected officials, law enforcement, engineers, planners, tourism, all mixed into each of these groups rather than keeping them all separate. And so we had economic development, livability, policy and coordination, towards zero deaths, and transportation workforce development. And I do want to thank all of our facilitators that we had for each of these. We had a lot of different facilitators. Oana and Tim Kirby from Colorado DOT, Brian Roberts from NACE, Dan Ditchkowski from TSAG, Bill Schell and Nick Ward from Montana State University, Linda McIntyre from the National Park Service. We had Michael Parks from Brazos Valley COG, Linda DePriest from LDP Strategies, and David Kack from WTI. We had Doug Schinkel, Amanda Essex, and Ann Teagan from the National Conference of State Legislators. We had Marie Walsh from Louisiana LTAP and Robert Hull from Cambridge Systematics. And then we had Steve Albert from WTI. So I do want to thank all of our facilitators because it was definitely not an easy job to take down all of these notes, to facilitate all the discussions, and keep everyone on track. The third day, I'm going to talk a little bit about this real quick too and then go over some themes. The third day we did our overview of our outcomes. So we had presentations based on each of these different sessions. We also had Hillary Eisbrands, who's on the phone with us today, do a next steps panel discussion for us where she had each of the facilitators answer some questions about what happened during their sessions and also give some high-level answers to questions that she asked. And we had a closing keynote speaker, which was Jill Ryan from Eagle County, and she's the commissioner there, and she did a fantastic job closing out our summit for us. So what did we hear? Rather than tell you a few bullet points from each of the 10 discussions, I've tried to lump these all into the major themes that we heard because we did find that we heard the same themes throughout each of these discussions, regardless of who was in the discussions and what the topic was about. When the white paper is finished, and it's in draft form currently, but when it is finished, it will be posted up on our website and you'll be able to get more detailed information on each of the sessions individually and all of the details about those. So what we heard that we really need to communicate rural needs. We need to have a non-adversary mindset. We need to not look through an urban lens when telling a rural story. So we shouldn't be using urban data and urban measurements and urban comparisons in order to talk about a rural area. We need to communicate the importance of the rural needs and also how those needs, if fixed, could benefit an urban area as well. We need funding for rural projects, which improves global competitiveness for our country as a whole, because this lowers the price of food and it serves urban communities as well. So really providing that funding in rural areas will help too. We need to also articulate the consequence of no action and that has a negative impact on everyone. Again, not just on the rural communities, because rural communities are being used for tourism. They're being used to move our food and move our all of the things we need for our economics. We also need to create a unified voice for rural interests and strategies. And this unified voice, it was talked about having that be from local and state agencies, also from stakeholders such as Farm Bureau and mining organizations, and also partnerships from people such as NACO and NACE and NATO and all of the alphabet soup that we've talked about that attended our summit. We also talked about funding. And as most of you on the phone know, there's not enough funding to go around, but we did try and come up with some ways that we could offset this. So one of the ways that they came up with was creative funding through coalition building, to also create public-private partnerships that could help supplement some of the public dollars, to advocate for an increase in the fuel tax at state, federal levels that can be used for safety program enhancements, and also educate the public on the benefits of a tax increase such as this. It was felt that when you properly educate the public, they may agree more to a tax increase if they understand what the consequences are. We also need to be more flexible at the local level to raise transportation revenue and prioritize traffic safety program enhancements. And lastly, it was recommended that we should look at reevaluating rural versus urban funding formulas. What we also heard regulatory and legislation-wise was that we should consider consolidating overlapping regulatory administrative processes and requirements. We should create uniformity in state regulations because currently those affect both the safety and efficiency for freight. We should allow property acquisition to occur prior to NEPA approval, and that we need to seek expansion of exceptions regarding historic roads and bridges. And this could be either by including more roads or by increasing the number of years before designation. We also heard that we should possibly seek legislation for allowing automated enforcement with specific safety outcomes and increasing enforcement penalties and driver's license requirements. It was felt that by seeking legislation for this, they may become more acceptable from the public. We also heard that we need more education and training at all levels. So it was decided that we should encourage and fund conversation, information sharing and exchanges, peer networking, and in-person meetings with a diverse multidisciplinary gathering of stakeholders. But that we should also be encouraging the public. We heard a lot of stories of people in the public and local communities being a local champion and them being the one to be able to get the projects done and accomplished, but that when they have an idea and they're willing to be the champion, they also need the training and education and resources that our local agencies have to help them know what the next steps are and how they should go about doing it, and that we should be helping them and providing that information to them. We also heard about conducting ongoing public outreach and public relations and giving information to the community. A lot of people talked about the best way they get information and input is just simply to go to a fair in their community and get that information. And then it was also suggested that we could do some more formal rural road safety training. And this may be through a trade school model in high school, through internships in high school and college, by requiring hands-on training. And also to make sure that our teachers in the high school and the college have qualified, certified, licensed teachers that have experience in the field or trade, not just having been through schooling. We also heard some key themes for planning. We heard that data is a tool to help inform decisions, and everybody in every single one of the sessions mentioned data and how important it was to improve the availability, the depth, and the accuracy of this data. That we need to train and educate on the importance of data, and we need to make sure we're providing funding to get this. But it was also brought up that you should start where you are, and that if all you have is anecdotal evidence, that is data, and that should be taken seriously, and that we should be taking data from everywhere we can get it. Our law enforcement partners have a lot of data that we can use. Our businesses have a lot of data. The tourism and our public health, all of them have a lot of data that we can use as well. We need to create a true multidisciplinary approach, ensuring that all stakeholders are at the table. And this includes everyone from public health to freight to law enforcement, EMS, tourism, tribal. We also heard that we should formalize towards zero deaths in all of our plans and include that and make sure that every state is working towards that. We need to encourage local safety plans to include a wide range of disciplines, as we just mentioned, all of those stakeholders, to make sure you're incorporating similar and parallel plans that can help you identify gaps and overlaps. And we learned about a lot of different plans that are out there that could help with this. The Towards Zero Death plans, livability plans, public health has plans, a lot of tourism and national parks and public lands have plans, economic development community has plans. So there's a lot of places that have plans that talk about transportation safety that we can pull from. And then also make sure that the local safety plans are aligned with the state strategic highway safety plan. We heard that we should be identifying strategies to plan for the lowest common denominator of drivers who are unfamiliar with the area. And unfamiliarity could be with signage, with conditions, with the roadways themselves, or even sometimes with the vehicles if it's in a tourist location and people are driving recreational vehicles or motorcycles that they have rented, or even a rental car that they've never driven before that is significantly different from their own. We heard that we need to create a balance between safety, access, livability, the character of the road or the area, the community, and economic development. And this was especially important in tourism settings, like a public land where there are many different adjacent landowners, and also in a setting where a state highway becomes a main street. We need to ensure that strategies are locally appropriate and culturally meaningful. And one of the examples of this was the recent marketing that has been created for Native Americans, which includes brochures and billboards about seatbelt use and not drinking and driving. And we also talked about providing locals with resources and assistance in how to use these resources once they have them, because as we stated in the first section, safety is not always their main job. They have many jobs, and this is just one of the things that they do. And so we heard that some of the states that have been most successful with getting the locals to be able to create their own plans and to be able to improve safety have done that by having dedicated staff to help the locals do that. And they talked about the fact that MPOs and RPOs can help with this in some cases. And lastly, we heard about safety culture. We heard that in order to make things safer, we're going to need to shift our culture, shift how we think, and that trying to move people's culture is very uncomfortable. And if you aren't uncomfortable, you're not doing enough. And this is a quote up here that's from Nick Ward from the Center for Health and Safety Culture. And he said, if we really want towards zero deaths, then we have to get uncomfortable. We have to change the way we think and change our culture. And one of my favorite anecdotes from the summit that someone brought up was that when our kids are little, we teach them to play doctor because they save lives. Doctors save lives, but so do traffic safety engineers. So why can't we make it acceptable for our kids to play traffic safety engineer? And why don't we change the perspective for young people on traffic safety, and that us saving lives is just as important? So we also heard a call to action. Craig Allred from FHWA said this quote, and I loved it. He said, we need to be standing shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement, EMS, and fire, and understand that this is a group effort, that we stand together for safety. And with that, I'm going to open it back up to our guest speakers again and see if Hillary, David, or Linda have any thoughts that they'd like to share specifically from the 10 discussion sessions. And I know that a few of you were facilitators, so you may have some things that I missed that you'd like to share as well.
So this is Linda. I'll go ahead and jump in.
Go ahead, Linda. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. You know, one of the things I really appreciated about this conference was the opportunity to include recreational tourism travel as part of the discussion, not only about safety, but about how it links also to other needs in rural areas and economic development as well. So in thinking about that, we often think about tourism as something that brings new appreciation for resources and new experiences, new opportunities for economic development. It also brings safety risks. And I thought our team did a really good job, our breakout session, of talking about some of those particular issues. And you mentioned a couple of them. I had the opportunity to travel to the Ozarks National Scenic Riverways site. I'd never been there a few weeks ago, and I had a powerful reminder, a flashback to the work that we all did together after going through many, many miles of the kind of conditions that we all talked about together in our breakout session, which was unusual road geometry, limited lines of sight, lack of familiarity with local conditions, abundant roadside wildlife, lack of lighting, and other things. And as we start to see the population of the United States continue to urbanize, tourism travelers may become less and less familiar with some of these roadside conditions. So as we're thinking about not only about how we invest in our infrastructure and our infrastructure safety, we may also want to think about how we are able to talk to our visitors in advance of coming into some of these local roads with multiple owners, inconsistent conditions, and letting them know that in advance so that as they encounter these conditions, they're prepared, they're ready. And this seems like something powerful that this group could be working on.
Thank you, Linda. David or Hillary, do you have anything you'd like to share, or should I move on to the poll?
Jamie, this is Hillary. I'm just going to add a couple of things. I think, and this actually resonates not only with the sessions that occurred during this point in the summit, but also I'd say overall a significant takeaway for myself was the public health and how just like every state prepares a strategic highway safety plan, every state typically is preparing a public health plan, and for many counties and for many states, traffic fatalities is one of the things that they are addressing in these public health plans. And real eye-opener in terms of how we can step out of our silos and look at and partner with other groups within our agencies to work towards zero deaths, to work towards preventing those injuries. And Clackamas County, Oregon came up as an example of a county that it has already done that with their transportation safety plan, is reaching across the lines, reaching outside the silos, and working together with public health, with their elected officials, within engineering, as well as their law enforcement, and coming together with a unified plan. Which brings me to a couple of words that seem to resonate after these sessions, and that was the significance in rural America of coalition building and unifying the message in terms of achieving the goal, and that is safer roads in the rural areas.
Yeah, Jamie, this is David. I just, say, kind of echo what has been said before, in that it is such a cross-cutting issue. Transportation, can lead to economic development, improve safety, improve people's health. And so I think it's important to say we're all in this together. It was mentioned previously, is that there's great people to bring on board to talk about how transportation can do so many different things, and if we do it right, it's safe and it does make people's lives better.
Thank you, both of you. Those are, and Linda as well. All three of you had some great insights from the summit. At this point, we're going to move on to question and answer again. If anyone in our audience has any questions that you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and put those in the chat pod. We're also going to have you fill out this poll that I just switched to as well. Which of the following was not a key theme from the summit? So which one is wrong? Don't look through an urban lens when telling a rural story. More flexibility is needed at the local level to raise transportation revenue and priorities. And prioritize traffic safety program enhancements. Encourage and fund multidisciplinary information exchanges. Local safety plans should be created. And there is an overabundance of quality safety data available to everyone. And it looks like everyone has finished filling out the poll. And you all do have this correct. There is definitely not an overabundance of quality data. We heard over and over again from all of the different sessions that there is still a lack of data, and that the data that is available is not always quality, and that it's not always available to everyone. We did hear that many of the states have data, but that the locals don't know that it is available to them. But that there's also just a lot of data that's missing and is needed. So we do have a comment in the chat pod from Clackamas County, and they said thank you for the shout out, and that they are working with stakeholders from public health, local elected officials, and their local communities. So, and we do have some information up on the Safety Center's website about Clackamas County and the great work that they're doing if anyone is interested in finding out more information about that. We did have Joe Merrick present in one of our previous webinars, and so you can find his, the county's information and their plan up on our archived webinars as well, if you guys have interest in looking at that further. At this time, I'm going to give the presentation over to Steve Albert, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the example action items that were identified by attendees while they were at the summit. Steve?
Thanks, Jamie. it's very rare, I think we would all agree, that we go to a conference and actually get inspired about doing something that's going to better our society, make it more safe, make sure that we're meeting the mission of our agency. And I think what I saw in the material that I'm about to go through was people were really feeling inspired to actually make a change. And I give a lot of credit to Jill Ryan from Colorado, who really did a great job of facilitating this and looking at example action items from an agency perspective and what she was going to take home, as well as what she was inspiring others to take home. So as you can see on the slide, I think Jill really did a great job of kind of pulling information out of people. Some of the things that her organization, as I guess well as others were going to do, is to look at institute the Towards Zero Deaths into their strategic planning process to make sure it focuses on resources and meets some of the goals that we've talked about during this. Try to direct more HISP funding to the counties and distribute it better. Also identify from the LTAP organizations that what they were going to take away from this was to coordinate with local public health departments and to link to their strategic highway safety plan, and also to take the message about safety culture back to their SHSP council. Next page. And NATO, who was a principal partner in getting this summit off the ground, said that they were going to consider a session at one of their upcoming conferences in integrating the required economic development plans with transportation plans, so that they kind of are hand in hand in developing when they develop things. The Colorado counties, I forgot what it's called now, CCI, as well as Colorado Association of County Road Supervisors, said they wanted to added sessions on safety and direct towards elected officials and road supervisors and engineers at their annual winter conference. They thought that would be a good action item for them. The Safety Center said that we're going to co-host a webinar with NACE and for county engineers on Towards Zero Deaths and incorporate a strategic tour to other countries. I think this was being targeted at Nick Ward, to look at what they're doing overseas or in other countries relating to safety culture. Also, that the center is going to work with the Oklahoma EMS Association to get on their agenda to speak about safety at a local or national EMT association. And finally, added to the public health and NHTSA representations to stakeholder groups, and we have actually been doing that and working with NHTSA on some traffic safety culture. So the next part, Jaime has said, do you want something to be addressed? Please put it in your pod and type away so we can address some of those questions.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, so if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat pod at this point, and we will talk about those. I do also want to share that I received an email earlier this morning as well from another county that let us know that based on the outcomes of the summit that they are planning to undertake a local road safety plan. And they had not planned to do that before attending the summit. So that's great news as well, that we are having some impacts. And at this point, we are going to go to another poll question while we wait and see if anyone has any questions. And this is going to be an open-ended question for you guys. But the Safety Center is creating a white paper based on these outcomes of the summit. And who do you believe this should be distributed to? Are there particular organizations or types of organizations that you think we should make sure are targeted when we distribute this white paper? And while people are typing in that as well, I do want to open it up for Hillary and David and Linda and see if any of the three of you had additional action items that you've heard of come out of the summit, or if your organizations were planning to take any action items as well based on the summit.
This is Linda. I just have maybe an overall observation in terms of action items. I work for the National Park Service, and our traffic data is even less robust than many other organizations. And for a long time, that lack of data, I think, in some sense, kept us from setting up systems and making plans in a way that maybe we should have done. And as we've started to move in new areas of management for the National Park Service, I guess I just offer up, this came up at the end of the 3 days, was don't let the lack of data prevent you from acting. There are reasonable actions you can take. You may be able to get some proxy indicators. Other jurisdictions may have data that your jurisdiction or your agency lacks that may be able to help you make a wise decision. So if you're not collecting a lot of data, take heart. There are other ways to maybe even approach improving safety. There's a lot of data out there. And I just encourage everybody to do everything that they can to do what they need to do to make wise decisions.
Thank you, Linda. That's a great point, and we should definitely make sure that we have that documented in the white paper.
Jamie, this is Hillary. I'll just add one more thing, and that is, I think you've already said it, but again, one of the kind of quotes that came out is use what you have where you are, and that is a lot of don't expect someone necessarily to come to you. Think about what you do every day and what your immediate colleagues can do with what you have, and it goes to what Linda just said too in terms of the data. Think of the other unique ways that you can advance safety in your own organization and then everyone that you touch. And I would say in terms of action items, for me personally, again, it's reaching out to some of the folks that are interested in local road safety plans, or I've kind of changed my tune on what I want to call that. It's really transportation safety plans. And the folks that we can work with, I know there's a couple of counties, we got Pitkin County in Colorado as well as Mesa County that are very interested, both that attended this conference, on how they can create a local road safety plan. This is something the Federal Highways Office of Safety feels very strongly about in getting more of these localized, regionalized safety plans to advance safety and reduce fatal and injury crashes. And so I think that that's something we have opportunities. Those of you that are familiar with Federal Highways Everyday Counts initiative, EDC4 is on its way, and that will continue on with the data-driven safety analysis. And that includes not only the state DOTs, but all local agencies and how you can use data, whatever data you have, how you can use that to reduce fatal and injury crashes. And the last thing I'm going to mention that's something new that has come up since this summit is something called the Road to Zero. I don't know much about it, but it is a collaborative effort between Federal Highways, NHTSA, CDC, and other agencies that we can't all do it on our own. And so at the very high level, at the federal level, agencies coming together and saying, we're going to work towards zero. And so I encourage you to keep your eyes open for more information. And maybe, I think Mike Griffith is on the webinar today. Perhaps he has some more information other than the announcement that came out just a few short weeks ago.
Thank you, Hillary. That's a great point. And for those of you who are interested in more information on Road to Zero, on the Safety Center's website, there is a blog post that links to that press release. It's right on our homepage, so you can go ahead and take a look at that press release and get some more information there as well. We do have one question that came in on the chat pod, and it is, when do you anticipate the white paper will be completed? The latest that we're thinking it'll be completed is TRB, but we do hope to get it out to you guys sooner than that. All of the pieces are going to go back out to the facilitators of the sessions to have them review it and make sure that we got all of the information correct from the way they remember it. However, having said that, in a couple of slides from now, we are going to be providing you with the link to the website that you can go to. That website has all of the available PowerPoint presentations that we had from the summit, and it also has audio files from the opening session speakers. So all of that information is already available on our website, and that link, like I said, will be coming to you guys shortly in this presentation. And another question, what is TRB? Sorry. TRB is the Transportation Research Board. It occurs every year in January in Washington, D.C., and it is there are a lot of different transportation committees that meet to discuss transportation research, and there are several committees on rural transportation that we do hope to present to about the outcomes of the summit. And at this point,
so Jamie, this is David. I was just going to say a couple things. Hillary brought up the quote, and I think I might have mentioned it at the summit. It was President Theodore Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And you know, as we talked earlier about the funding, no one, I think, on their own has all the funding they need to address all the issues. So I think that's why, as we talked about the coalition building, is important to pool resources as well, be that financial resources, expertise, and knowledge, those kinds of things to work together. Linda mentioned the data, and you had talked earlier, in rural areas, a lot of time it's just anecdotal evidence that, law enforcement, the volunteer EMS folks, have a gut feeling, will say, geez, this corner is an issue, or this stretch of road seems to be an issue. We're responding here a lot. And sometimes that's probably all you're going to get. And you say that's how we identify those areas that we need to fix. And again, as we talk about the distances in rural areas, people tend to drive further to do what they want to do in life, drive less fuel-efficient vehicles. To look at alternatives. The gentleman from the tribe said if you want to improve safety on tribal areas, start a public transportation system. So I think, well, yeah, you're not going to get a lot of people biking, 35 miles one way to get to the doctor from their home. There are a lot of things we can do to provide alternative modes in rural areas as well.
Thank you, David. Those are great points, and you're right. I did not stress enough about the alternative transportation and non-motorized when going through those sections, so thank you for bringing those up, too. I appreciate it. Now I'm going to turn the webinar back over to Steve Albert, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about what you guys can do, those of you on the webinar, for advancing the change. Steve?
Thanks, Jamie. So far, you've heard about the National Working Summit and the goals and expectations. You've heard about the 10 discussion topics that were outcome from that. You've heard about examples of action items identified by attendees at the summit. And now we're talking about what can your organization do to advance change. And these were ideas which came from attendees at the conference, and I think are pretty broad and can be incorporated to almost every agency. And so some of those ideas were such as joining the Towards Zero Deaths movement, engaging safety stakeholders, taking the first step towards a local road safety plan, identifying other plans in your community that may include safety strategies. All this is reaching out, reaching out, reaching out. And as we've talked about in the last few minutes here, use what you have, and then finally incorporate TZD into your short and long-term range plans. Next page. Continuing on with what your organization may be able to do, talk to your local elected officials about community needs, reaching up or reaching down in the organizations. And when you have, if you're a state DOT, for instance, when you have a consultant come in who may be collecting a lot of data, make sure you share it with locals as well, so maybe they can leverage that data to meet safety needs. Next one is creating a rural research needs statement and get them funded. If anyone has any ideas that the center might be able to advance or to give you contacts with other safety committees that maybe you might not know, please contact Jaime or go to our resource library. It may be there as well. So what resources do we have available to us as agencies, as organizations, as universities? We have, obviously, the National Center for Rural Road Safety being truly a one-stop shop, has a wealth of information that is categorized by whatever the need might be. We have our LTAPs and TTAPs to go through. We have places like Hillary Works, where we have FHWA Resource Center. We have NATO. We have all the alphabet soup organizations, NATO, NACO, NACE, TSAG, NHTSA. All those organizational websites are hot linked that you will have in the future. Also, there are a variety of summit presentations for this that you can get your hands on. I think that will have information. And also, FHWA has a local and rural road safety program, which you have a hot link and you can find. Other resources include the local road safety for elected officials. If you have the opportunity to present, this is a canned presentation that you may be able to customize and then to give that to your local county officials. There is also CDC's Tribal Road Safety website, be useful, as well as ITS America and anything that you might want relating to connected vehicles, whether it be AASHTO, USDOT's effort with connected vehicles, or others. And Jaime, back to you.
Thanks, Steve. And so this is going to be the last question and answer section based on all of the information that we've shared about the summit. So if anyone has any further questions, we'd love to answer those for you. You can just put them in the chat pod over on the left-hand side. The remainder of the webinar will be trying to get some information out of you guys about a second summit and what you might like to see, and if you have some ideas. So we do have another poll question as well for you. And this one is that based on this webinar, what do you think could be some of your action items to help advance the change? We've shared some examples from the summit itself, as well as some of the things that have happened. But is there anything that you might now take back to your organization based on today's webinar? We'll give you a couple minutes to fill that out. And while we're doing that, Hillary or David or Linda, if you have anything else you'd like to share about the summit, any of your other observations, or if there are any action items that you think could be taken that we didn't list.
Jaime, this is Steve. Can I suggest something to the listeners? And I wonder if there is a great demand or a need out there for some type of peer-to-peer program relating to local traffic safety, whether that would have merit, would it have need, or would it not have any need?
Steve, we're hearing from some of the comments that that would be very beneficial.
Thank you, Jaime.
Okay, and we are going to, I'm going to move back to the presentation, but if anyone has any other action items, you can go ahead and put those in the chat pod as well. So now we do want to talk to you a little bit about the summit overall and potentially a future summit. And so we did receive a lot of positive feedback on the summit as we've mentioned to you. We did have a lot of emails after the fact letting us know what people were going to do based on the summit. And we also had a survey that went out. And so on this slide, you're seeing some of the positive feedback that we heard. We had a lot of great information about the format itself, and that people really liked the roundtable discussions and felt that that was more helpful than just having presentations for the entire conference. And that because it was an interactive conference, they felt like they accomplished more. They also felt like the mix of attendees was really good and surprisingly diverse, although we did hear at our closing session that there were some organizations that were missing that we would have liked to have had. Some of those are because we did not anticipate needing them and had not invited them, but others were just that they weren't able to make the date. But if we do this again, we will make sure that they are included. So some of the constructive criticism or suggestions that we got was that we need more clarity on how some of the specific topics fit into the traffic safety framework. And the example that was provided was the economic development piece. Some people were unclear as to how that fit. We also would need more interaction between the local agencies and the tribal representatives. We were lucky that we did have several tribal representatives there, but in the future we would like to have many more as well. We would like participation from elected and appointed officials and their staff. We did have 2 elected officials attend, but it would have been beneficial had we had more than just those 2. And then there was the need to focus on counties without dedicated engineering staff and how to deploy low-cost systematic countermeasures. We also did have 1 student who was in attendance for our conference, and they felt like it was very beneficial and suggested that we do invite more students in the future. And then there was also a suggestion that we should have more clarity on how we define rural roads for the summit itself, and either have 2 classifications, which is local and highway, or just remove the highways as a rural road classification altogether. We also had some suggestions on topics that could be added for a future summit, and those were to develop a definitive position statement to take forward to the national level. That it would be great if we had a roundtable discussion on what you would like to accomplish at a future event. If we had a discussion on how to implement new ideas back home. Some more discussion on best practices and success stories and safety measures that could be implemented. A discussion on the unique differences between engineering, operations, and planning, because they are very distinct. And then more information and solutions to the human behavior problems. So we did have a session on safety culture, and we did have some discussion about that in the wrap-up closing session, but having more about that. Our summit session did talk mainly about organizational safety culture and how to change the safety culture within your organization itself, so within your DOT or within your public health department, rather than talk about how to change your safety culture with the public itself. And now, so at this point, we would like to get your feedback on some things. We did hear from those that attended the summit that they would like to see it happen again. We were thinking that we could potentially do this in 2 years if possible and if funding allows. And we were trying to gauge when would be a good time. We did back up to a few conferences this year, which we will be more cognizant of in the future. We did try and pick a date that was between all of them, but we missed a few in there. But overall, do you think it would be better to host this type of discussion in the spring, the summer, or the fall? And I will go to a poll break about this. And then the other question for you is, where would you recommend that we look into having the next summit? We did choose Denver because it is it is easy for everyone from the entire United States to get there. We would like to make sure we have a lot of diversity. So the ease of getting there was very good. It is a more rural of an urban city, which we were also looking for as well. So one of the suggestions that has come out so far is Kansas City. But if there are other suggestions, we would love to hear those as well, so we can start looking for hotels to host this type of summit at again. We do have a comment in the chat pod that summer's not a great time, and And we're realizing that that would be very hard for not only the construction side of people, but also the tourism side, as well as just everyone's vacations that they tend to take in the summer. So that is getting the smallest amount of votes currently anyway. Okay, so I'll give you another minute and then I'm going to close out these polls and we'll move on. We have about 15 minutes left, so we would like to get your input on a few additional things. So one of the other things that I mentioned to you guys is that there were some attendees who were missing, and there were others who we just felt like we didn't have enough of. And so to accommodate this and try and get those numbers up, our steering committee in the future, we hope to have a tribal representative, probably from the TTAP Association, to have a representative from the public-private health section other than just the CDC, so someone else as well, and then having someone from agriculture. And then for attendees themselves, to make sure that along with those three that were listed up there, that we have a bigger presence by law enforcement and EMS, bigger presence of elected officials and students. And so we did also want to get your recommendations on this and see if there are others that you can think of that we hadn't mentioned that we should potentially enlist to come as well, or others that we should invite to be on our steering committee. Okay, and I am going to close this out and move on, but if you have other ideas, please go ahead and put them in the chat pod too, because we would love to continue taking recommendations. And as always, you can always email us as well and give us any feedback that you have. The next thing that we would like to get your feedback on is potential themes or topics that we could have at the summit. So our 10 discussion topics, it took us quite a while to come up with those. And so some of the things that have been brought up either by way of the summit itself or through the surveys that we've done so far were to talk more about the autonomous and connected vehicles. How do we improve safety in the view of these coming? How do we leverage new opportunities that technology is going to give us? And how do we combine the current and the future to make the best of what we got and what is coming to make everything safer? Talking more about quality of service and performance metrics that are sensitive to rural areas. For instance, we talked about not trying to talk about rural through the urban lens, and one of the examples we got was the level of service measurement. If you look at many rural areas using level of service, they're never going to look like they have problems. But we know that that is not correct. So is there something different that we could use as a quality of service measurement? We also talked about data and that more is needed, but that you can also do something with what you have, and maybe coming up with some ways, some low-cost, easy ways to use the data that you do have, and to also collect more data. So I'm going to open this up again to another poll question. You can feel free to keep typing in the chat pod as well. And this poll question, again, is going to be an open-ended one to get your feedback on potential themes or topics that you think should be discussed at the next summit.
Jamie, this is Hillary. Can I add something here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one of the things that the autonomous vehicle, the V2I, V2V, so vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure conversation, I always struggled with that when we talk about the rural environment and the rural roadways. And I want to say that Blaine Leonard from the Utah Department of Transportation really was the first person that I've heard speak about autonomous vehicles and this topic in the context that I could relate to in a rural environment. And Jaime, I'm not sure if we have his presentation posted on the website or not, but it was really the first time I was able to see how the autonomous vehicle and how the data information that we have, the cell phones, and all of that really can tie and can help us in the rural environment, even despite the fact that sometimes in a rural environment, the fleet's not going to change over perhaps like it might in a urban environment, talking about how we use data, how we use our cell phones, and how that data can be used to let us know about a weather condition on the roadway, whether there's other things that we can learn from each other as drivers just by having our own devices. So maybe our vehicle doesn't have that, but maybe a device that we have in our vehicle can communicate that with others. So I'm encouraged for those of you that may be a skeptic like I was prior to hearing Blaine's presentation to check that out and think about it maybe in a little bit different way like I do now.
Jaime, this is
Thank
Steve.
you.
Can I address that for an idea for something?
Sure.
FHWA and ITS America put forth the at least the first draft of a gap analysis for rural connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles. That would be a good presentation to also put on our website. And I've talked to Linda Dodge about this a little bit too. And then maybe when we have the Rural ITS conference coming up here somewhat soon, we could have that as part of the summit as well. I think there's lots of opportunities and there's lots of education and outreach that needs to go down to the local level to make sure that they understand what connected or autonomous vehicles are and how it may impact local stakeholders.
Thank you, Hillary and Steve. And to address Hillary's comment too, the presentation by Blaine is available on our website. So if you go to Rural Road Safety, you will find it with the rest of the summit presentations. And we did provide that link on the resource slide a couple slides ago. So again, I will point out that the handout pod has that available for download when I go back to the presentation. And also this is being recorded and will be available on our archive trainings page. And that presentation will also be available, the PDF to get this presentation with the resource links will also be available on our website as well. And so we do hope that in today's webinar, what you've learned so far is to identify the format we used at the summit, to understand what some of the main themes were from these 10 discussion topics that we had, to be able to list what some of the example action items were that came out of the summit, and understand what your organization can do, and then also to assist in defining a future summit as well. So we will take all of this feedback back to our steering committee for the summit. And if you guys have, again, as I mentioned, if you have any additional one, please feel free to let us know. So a few additional things for everyone is that we do have an upcoming webinar in December. It will be held December 8th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. Please note that this is a change in time from our typical one. This will be a webinar on Towards Zero Deaths, information from county engineers. It will be provided by NACE and the Louisiana LTAP. The link to access our archived webinars, where this one will be, is on this particular slide as well. We do have a training video on the introduction to road safety culture. You can access it from this link, or just from our website. It's on our multimedia page if you have interest in watching that video. And we also do have a distribution list that you can sign up for. We also have a Twitter and a Facebook page as well, and a LinkedIn page. And if you have any further information or questions, you can reach us at this 800 number or at info@ruralsafetycenter.org. Again, I would encourage you, if you're listening on the phone in a group of more than just one person, and you have not all registered separately, please send us an email to this info@ruralsafetycenter.org to let us know the email addresses and names of those who are attending. That way I can ensure you receive your survey where you are able to check the box to see if you would like continuing education units for this webinar today. I did note, Tim Peters, that you put a suggestion for a topic in the chat pod, and we will have that added and it says bicycle safety on roads in rural areas may be a good topic too, so we'll make sure to include that in our discussions as well. So if we don't have any additional questions, that is it. So thank you, everyone, and thank you very much to Steve and Hillary, Linda and David for all helping out today on our webinar. I really appreciate it. And again, the website for the summit is up on our Safety Center website. The presentations and the audio for that first session are there, and the white paper should be available by TRB, which is at the beginning of January. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jamie. Good job.